Hey everyone, CJ here, back with more How to Dungeon Master videos. This past week, we've been getting an influx of new subscribers. To those of you who are new to this channel, I'd like to say, welcome to the channel, my fellow nerds. The How to Dungeon Master series is part of my long-term goal to grow the hobby within the general public by creating easy-to-understand animated videos that teaches people how to play the game, how the classes work, and how to run it. It is a very rewarding hobby, and I'd like to see more people play it. When I was just a kid, I was living in the middle of virtually nowhere. Nobody even knew what D&D was, so it was technically impossible to find a game. Starting my own group was just too daunting. I didn't know how to play the game. Nobody can even show me how the game is played, and I have no idea how I should start. Then, years later, after a few big moves, I found a group to play with. After proceeding to DM and teach the game, I decided to create this series. This series is made for everyone who wants to learn how to play D&D, especially those who were like the past me, those who had no idea how to play and how to start. This series is approaching its end. We have one more How to DM video after this. But for now, I will talk about homebrew rule creation, player option creation, balancing issues, and more. So see you after the intro. First thing first, let's get everyone on the same page by defining what homebrewing means. The origin of the term comes from the practice of small-scale non-commercial home production of alcoholic beverages. But in the context of tabletop RPG, it means a lot of things. The creation of campaign setting, new rules, player options, and any features you're adding to the game are considered homebrews. The most common thing to homebrew is the campaign setting, but I have dedicated a whole video to world building, so we can jump on to the next one. Game mechanics. Homebrew games does not necessarily mean that the rules has to be completely original. Most dungeon masters that I know borrow mechanics from other tabletop RPGs, wholesale or slightly altered. If you want to add a bit of cosmic horror flavor to your game, you can use the madness mechanic. It is in the DMG on page 258. But let's be real, this mechanic is inspired by Call of Cthulhu's insanity mechanic. In official organized games like Adventurers League, you have to strictly follow the official rules. But when you're playing a home game, there's nobody who could stop you from stealing everything that's cool. Maybe your players can if they don't like the new rules, but that's another issue. Here are some really cool mechanics that I sometimes borrow for my own game. I often use the graduated scale of success from games like Fate and Doctor Who RPG. For example, if Winnie the Rogue failed her stealth roll only by a couple of points, she may not get immediately discovered. The guard may hear something suspicious and decide to investigate the source of the noise. Fate's point system is also quite unique. It is like inspiration, but it has more uses and it can be stored. But most interesting of all, it can be used as a bargaining chip to influence player behavior. For example, while on her infiltration mission, Winnie sees a treasure chest. It would make sense for her character to jeopardize the mission to try to open the chest. But her player is being cautious, so I would offer her one inspiration point to go for the chest. If I really want some trouble to start, I may even offer 2 or more points to tempt her to do it. There are many interesting rules from other games you can borrow from. For example, Double Cross. The premise of this Japanese tabletop RPG is that the player characters are people who are infected by virus that gives them superpowers. But at the same time, it is trying to take over their minds. So to prevent them from turning, they have to create bonds, or to use the game term, Lois, with NPCs to remind them of their humanity. Their standard regenerative ability can usually prevent their death, but the real danger is in losing their selves. But before you do that or modify rules from other games, keep one thing in mind. D&D 5e is a relatively rules-light game, which means that it is simple and doesn't have too much rules. I know that some of you newcomers may scoff at the idea that D&D is simple, but it really is, especially when compared to its earlier editions and other rules-heavy games. The strength of 5th edition lies on its lightness. you can focus less on managing combat maneuvers and super specific proficiencies and focus more on telling a story. Also, if you are creating a new rule, make sure that it is worth implementing and it will improve the gameplay experience in the long run. You don't have to create a new rule if it is just a one-off thing that you can just settle with a judicious DM ruling. Adding too many new rules will bloat the game. Rules-heavy game have its place, and some people like it, proven by the popularity of Edition 3, 3.5 and Pathfinder, which is based on the last two. But be mindful that adding too many rules will change the gameplay experience. Don't forget that besides making new rules, you can also take out certain part of the official rules, such as arrow and ammunition counting and rations counting, things that your players may not enjoy. Creating the perfect game for your group is usually a process of trial and error. If your homebrew rule doesn't work for your group, you can always strike it off. But do it between session or adventure, so that you don't disrupt the flow of the game. When creating new rules, I would be mindful of human psychology. Rules can be rewarding or punitive. Rules that reward the players, like giving out hero points for doing heroic deeds, is a form of positive reinforcement. Rewards will cause your player to want to repeat certain behaviors and go beyond. Punitive rules like deducting gold reward for letting villagers die is a form of negative reinforcement. Because most people are loss averse, they may react more strongly against punishments. But in my experience, they will only do the bare minimum to prevent that loss. Both methods have their own merits, but balancing the two will usually net the best result. Another large part of homebrewing is the creation of new player options, like race, class, subclass, background, feats, or whatever else. Homebrewing race and background is relatively easy. Sometimes you don't even have to do actual homebrewing. You can just reskin the racial traits package of an existing race for your new one. Or you can swap out some traits of existing races. Balancing racial trait is an art. It will take a whole video to discuss it, so I won't be going into too much details here. You just need to look at a few obvious patterns, like the +2 and +1 ability score bonuses and how being small is usually tied to having lower speed. Being small is also generally considered to be an impediment that gets balanced by powerful traits. Flight is usually considered an overpowered trait at early levels, but as long as you don't go overboard, it is hard to completely ruin the game with race options. To be honest, I think some of the races in the PHP itself aren't balanced. Half-elves are quite powerful compared to the standard human option, especially if you choose the right class. Let's save the topic of balancing for later and move on to backgrounds. Creating a new background is an easy one. The PHP already has a guideline for it. You can use the custom background template in page 125 of your PHP and invent a new feature relevant to the campaign. Creating a new class or subclass usually takes more work. If you have the time, I highly recommend watching Mike Merle's Happy Fun Hour. He is the current creative director of D&D, and in that weekly hourly show, he often reveals his design process for creating new player options. If you don't have the time, let me condense what I have learned. In general, creating new subclasses is enough to change the character's playstyle. You don't have to create a completely new class, unless the whole paradigm of the class is different. For example, the concept of a pro wrestler can fit within the framework of the barbarian or fighter class, because it is really just finding a creative new way to crowd control and hurt things with impressive feats of strength. But if you want to create something completely different, like a Pokemon trainer or a stand user that specializes in fighting by proxy, then you will have to create a new class for that. It is also important to base the subclass on the right class so that you don't change the play experience too drastically, because you don't want your players to have to wait to play the characters they want. Even Mike Merles acknowledged that having to play as a first level spellcaster on a wizard before being able to play as level 2 sword and spell fighting bladesinger is not ideal. Waiting for one level is not that big of a deal, but some classes only get their subclass features at level 3. Depending on the group and campaign, that may take a long time, but it is also possible to start at higher level in homebrew games anyway. When creating new class or subclass features, don't forget about social or exploration features, because when I see homebrew classes or subclasses made by people online, too often they only focus on combat features, forgetting that combat is but one aspect of D&D. The biggest issue most people want to address when creating a new player option is game balance. But what does it mean in the context of D&D? If we think about competitive games and fighting games, it is about tweaking each option to give them equal chance at winning when played with the same amount of expertise. But D&D is a collaborative game, and balancing a new player option is measured upon how much more useful does the option make the player feel compared to similar options. If it is a damage dealing feature, it is relatively easy to measure because you can just compare the number with other features of the same level. But if it is a social or exploration feature, then it is a bit harder. Say for example, if you create the ability to read a person's life history by flipping their body part like a book, like Rohan Kishibei's stand ability in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Then, in this case, you can start by comparing it with class features or spells that achieve similar effects. For example, the Detect Thought spell is pretty similar to this one. Then, you compare the drawbacks and advantages of this feature. This ability would give you complete access to the target's life information, but it takes time to read, and your target would know what you are doing. If this ability is usable only once per short or long rest, then I think it can work as a level 3 feature. But game balance may not necessarily be that big of an issue when you are playing at home. Seeing another player constantly racking up higher damage number may get annoying, but if everyone gets their time to shine, they may not notice it at all. It is also hard to notice any imbalance if a player is playing a role that's not shared with other players. If you are the only healer in the group, they wouldn't know if you are doing too well or lacking. The DM can also adapt to it by adjusting the adventure and encounter. So you may not even have to mess with your players' new options. Unless you want to distribute and sell your class options to other people, it might not be necessary to test your character options too rigorously. Alright, that's it for the video. If you like this video, feel free to thumb it up. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and join the notification squad. It is a warm thank you to my patrons at Patreon for making this series possible. If you'd like to support the channel and series, please visit my Patreon page. CJ, over and out.